So I see we're live now. Hi, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we're here to congratulate Judy for this tremendous walk. She's headed 3,000 miles. And just as I understand it, last night you hit 1,000 miles. Is that right?
That's exactly right. It was almost 9 o'clock, and I was just hell bent on. I said, "No, I've got to do this. I got to get every tenth of a mile." And I was watching my app that tracks my distance, and I was like going as fast
Yeah.
as I could. And then I saw it turn over, and I said, "Yes, yes, 1,000 miles." So it's official.
That is fantastic. Well, congratulations. That is so exciting. And 1,000 miles going across the United States. And I understand you had your 81st birthday recently. So it's just unbelievable. As I've said time and time again, you continue to amaze me. You continue to amaze all of us. So impressed. And so tell us, where are you in Texas now?
Well, at the moment, we are in Van Horn, Texas. It's relatively small, but it would be east of El Paso,
Yeah.
southeast of El Paso, and coming up on small towns, very, very tiny, Valentine, and then Marfa, which is actually a very interesting community and artist colony
Huh.
in Texas. So I am really looking forward to that. And then we just keep going east across Texas to Del Rio.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
one of the best questions, and the UK is doing a story about you in the Independent, which has something like 20 million readers or something. They're doing your story, which is wonderful and exciting. And of course, one of the questions they asked is, why are you doing this? What is the goal here, and what motivated you to start this amazing walk across the United States?
Well, that's such a great question and one I get frequently.
Yeah.
Um, and I think a lot about my answer because originally, well, it is kind of twofold. The first reason is that I wanted to honor my own mother who passed away some 15 years ago from Alzheimer's after she battled it for 20 years.
Mm.
And of course, that was before your protocol. It was before I knew anything about alternatives. And it just makes me sad today that we didn't know what we know now,
Yeah.
that we can reverse the symptoms. So that's one thing, just to somehow honor her. And then,
Yeah.
secondly, and equally important, is that most people do not realize that you can reverse cognitive decline.
Yeah.
And this is a message that I want to give out to the world, really. And it's really thanks to you. And just to remind the viewers, 13 years ago in April, I visited you. I was absolutely in despair
Yeah.
because I had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and I had seen my family members go down that path. And I just felt so depressed and so desperate. And my good friend Anita said, "Well, I know this doctor who's been doing research for a while on the West Coast, and he's found a way to using his theory to reverse it." And she made the appointment with you, as you know, and I flew out, and the rest is kind of history for me. But
Yeah.
you were kind enough to give me a few hours of your time and explained your theories, and maybe you'll comment on that. I don't want to dig into that too much myself. But at that point, I was literally scribbling notes because you would say one thing and it would go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
And I think the message that I really want to stress is that my brain today is as good or better than it was way back when I was in college in my 20s and 30s. And I really owe that to the following the protocol and literally changing so many aspects of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a really good point. And of course, I think you did a huge favor for so many people because of your diligence and because of your persistence. So you really were detail oriented. You really stuck with this. We're in the midst of a trial now where we have 6 different sites, and a randomized controlled trial. And 4 of the sites are getting spectacular results, and 2 of them are not. And so it really does matter that the people are trained and that the people who are using the protocol, as you did, follow it. You do have to make the appropriate changes. And as far as the theory, we spent 30 years looking at, all the different possibilities, and there are so many theories about Alzheimer's. But we came to the conclusion that if you step back and look at this is really a network insufficiency. You have this truly remarkable synaptic network of about 500 trillion connections in your brain. And no surprise, it takes a certain amount of energetics. You can't have too much inflammation. You can't have too much toxicity. You can't have too much stress. You got to have enough neurotransmission, and you've got to have enough trophic support, things like hormones and nutrients and growth factors. So once you look at it that way, it's actually pretty simple to say, okay, well, this is a network, and we are trying to support this network. We're going to have to go down on the things that are damaging it. We're going to have to go up on the things that are supporting it. And so then it's just to the details of the things that do that. So thankfully, if you had gone away and done nothing and really not done this, not adhered to the stuff that you and I talked about in April of 2012, nobody would have been the wiser, and we wouldn't have known this. So when you then called me 3 months later and said, "Oh my gosh, my memory has been better than it's been in decades," it really gave us some feedback because, of course, we had been doing everything on mice and fruit flies and cells, so we didn't have any humans doing this. And as you know, we had been turned down for our trial that was to be done in Australia, but we got turned down because it was too complicated, and because we were doing more than one thing. So I think that is really, you helped people back then by doing the right things, and you're helping people now by spreading the word. And I do want to emphasize what you said, because the vast majority of people don't know that cognitive decline can be reversed. And in fact, when people hear about it, they argue about it. No, that's not possible. No, we're seeing it all the time. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people now. You just happen to be the first. And the other thing is that doctors don't know about it. So the doctors will say, well, no, that's not what I was taught. I don't believe that. So having people to understand this and to get on board and to deal with people who know what they're doing. We've trained over 2,000 physicians. We've trained a lot of health coaches, including you. You are now a health coach. And talk a little bit about if you would, about your work as a brain health coach.
Yes, thank you. I had so many people asking me what was I doing because they noticed a change, especially my
Yeah.
family and my friends.
Yeah.
And they would come to me and say, "Well, what are you doing? How can we do that? My Uncle Henry or my Aunt Susie are affected by memory loss." And I was kind of doing that ad hoc and without any formal training in that. And I decided to become board certified as a health and wellness coach. And I signed up, of course, for the Apollo training program after I finished my board certification. And here I am today. I've been coaching for quite a few years now, all over the world, thanks to the ability to do it on Zoom. And I have clients in the Philippines and the UK and Sweden, as well as all across the United States. And I think it's really wonderful to be able to share with people what I've done. And I do think they appreciate the fact that I've gone down that road myself. And
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
dealt with the struggles, the denial. Um, I see it all the time, and especially in new clients that I'm coaching, they really don't feel, they have doubts about, well, how could this work? Just changing your diet, your exercise, your sleep, your stress. I mean, that's not just actually.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
acknowledge that's a lot, but I always bring them back to what are your alternatives? What does the future look like if you keep on where you're at and you make no changes? No one wants to go there. It's a slippery slope, and I was on it, and I'm not on it anymore. And I think that as a testament to the protocol and the changes that I've made is what really enables me to walk across the country I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not an athlete. I didn't do any the training. People say, "How did you train for this walk?" And I first say I didn't train for it, but the truth is I did train for it. And how I trained for it was by following your protocol. That helped me to build up my immune system, my flexibility, my brain health, my gut health. All of those things have really comprised where I am today and why I'm able to do this.
Yeah, it's amazing actually. So, and you know, as you say, it's these basics that people don't realize how important they are. One of the very first patients I saw when I arrived at UCLA back in 2014 came in and I, you know, I was going through the same thing that you and I talked about, and I said, you know, you've got to have the appropriate blood flow, and you've got to exercise, you got to get your, you know, get your trophic factors up, your BDNF, and each thing I would say to him, he would say, that's not a cure for Alzheimer's. Like, no, that's not the way this works. This is a complex network. And you need to support the network and you need to decrease the drag, the inflammatory drag, the toxic drag, the stress related drag. And suddenly, you know, your network goes from non-functioning to functioning. You know, there's an old Chinese proverb that says, if you don't change what you're doing, you're going to end up where you're going. And you know that's exactly what's happening with so many of us. We're eating the processed food and we gain a few extra pounds and we're a bit sedentary. We're doing things that are inflammatory. We're not finding out that we may have some sleep apnea. We're not checking our oral microbiome. We're not eating enough fiber. We're not eating enough green, on and on and on. These things add up. And so, you know, we are headed down that standard American pathway toward metabolic disease, dementia, cardiovascular disease, all of that stuff. So, okay, if we change, we can change course if we want to. And the good news is the armamentarium is growing. It's really fantastic. People are realizing more and more that things like PCIV can be used for people who are very toxic, or plasmapheresis has been another one that's very helpful for people who are very toxic. Some of the photobiomodulation, the light therapies have been very helpful. Some of the mitochondrial support. So the good news is we have this big armamentarium, and figuring out for each person what is their personalized, what's their best case scenario is so important. So Judy, tell us a little bit about what are you doing for water, electrolytes, and food?
Another great question. Um, well, food, and I'm really aware because I've been mostly walking through desert area, and
Yeah,
not only a desert in the sense of being arid and dry, but a food desert. I mean,
yeah,
it really has brought home to me how sad it is for a lot of people who live in these rural areas and they don't have access to fresh food and, you know, vegetables and so forth and good quality ingredients. So luckily, one of my dear sponsors, and a shout out to all my sponsors, including Apollo Health and Zero Shoes and Care Scout and all of them have been wonderful. But in Trifecta is one of the sponsors, and they are providing delivery of food once a week. Now they have a national network for home delivery, so anyone can avail themselves of this, and they have a vast selection, a menu. You don't have to be a vegan or a vegetarian. You can, you know, you can go on keto, you can go on all these things. And so we arrange a week in advance to get a shipment where I'm going to take a day off walking, like a rest day, and then we pick it up at that hotel. So that food is very nutritious. I supplement that with picking up wherever I can at farmers markets or food stores, a salad and some fresh fruit and things like that. And so in that case, my food issue is really taken care of. And I eat a lot of nuts and seeds and nut butters.
yeah.
So I really give a shout out to Trifecta. They've been quite wonderful, and the food is tasty. It's very good. So I think that that helps. That helps that in that respect. And then I use a water filtration system. So if I get tap water, if I collect tap water wherever I can find it, then I put it through a filter so that I get rid of a lot of the impurities. Um, yeah, I mean, it's working. That part of it logistically is working just fine.
Yeah, fantastic. And one of the things that turns out to be important for so many people is that when they're eating a standard American diet, they're getting both the spikes and the troughs with both of which are harmful. You get the spikes and you get more glycated proteins like hemoglobin A1C and hundreds of other proteins that are non-enzymatically glycated. That is inflammatory. That is damaging to the proteins. But you also then crash and you get hypoglycemic. That damages your cognition as well. So when you're doing a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet, like KetoFlex 12.3, whether it's from Trifecta or whether you're doing it on your own, this is going to give you a much more stable glucose and actually much better for your system, much less inflammatory, and much more helpful for your cognition. So that's great. Now, there's a heat wave currently in the country. Are you in the midst of the heat wave or are you avoiding the heat wave?
Well, my route is following this sort of southern route from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida, and it really takes me across the biggest state in the Union,
Yeah,
Texas, and
yeah.
it's southern Texas, and it's most a lot of it is desert, and it was quite hot in the beginning, even crossing California, Arizona, New Mexico, and now in Texas. But luckily, there's been a little bit of a shift in the heat wave, and
Good.
unfortunately for people on the East Coast, it's gotten terribly hot. And they have the additional problem of humidity. At least when it was 110 degrees for me, it was dry heat. And I will say, just sending a plus for sauna, I purchased an infrared sauna for my home, and I've been taking a daily sauna for a few years now. And I think by sitting a half hour at 140 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit
Mhm.
heat actually prepared my body to address and deal with heat.
Yeah.
It really, honestly, it hasn't bothered me that much. Sometimes in the evening it's a bit hard to sleep if it's too hot, but out walking, it hasn't really been that issue, that much of an issue. I'm sure I'll run into it again. I mean, I'm crossing an entire country with multiple weather systems. There'll be tornadoes and hailstorms and who knows what, and we just have to be alert and prepared for that. I have a weather app on my phone, so I've had dust storms. Yesterday, I was sort of skirting well, I stayed on my path, but the thunderstorms were kind of all around me, and luckily, I just a bit of rain, so
I
it
see.
wasn't too bad.
Okay. Now, what are you doing for electrolytes?
Well, again, one of my sponsors, UCAN, and
Hmm.
it's spelled UCAN, a wonderful company, and I really urge everyone to go on their website and learn about them. The reason they were formed and set up is such a great story. But they have provided me with electrolyte powder, as well as energy packets and gels, energy gels, and bars. And honestly, those energy gels are fantastic because they don't raise, it's not a high glycemic, so it doesn't change my normal diet pattern. But if I'm out there and feeling a bit tired and I'll have some of the energy gel, it's like a 90 minutes of, like I'm ready to go.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
really shout out to them. I think that's been great. But I do add, I add the powder to my water, and I also I use creatine a little bit for
Yeah,
muscle. I was concerned a little bit about muscle wasting. I have lost a little bit of weight, and I've been doing what I've never done in my life, which is trying to gain weight.
yeah,
I'm eating a lot of avocados, a lot of nuts,
yeah.
olive oil, even the trifecta. I open up the trifecta and I'm sprinkling organic olive oil on it,
Good,
and I love it anyway, so I'm happy about that. I think I've got that plateau where I'm not really losing anymore
good.
and trying to keep it up because I walked yesterday, I don't know, more than 12 hours in a day. I mean, I had breaks. I stopped. I stopped a little bit, excuse me, but I'm not used to expending that much energy, so having the
Right.
calories in to balance out the energy going out is a little bit of a challenge on this. And if there's anybody out there who wants to send a message of, they're experts in functional nutrition about this, I'm all ears because I'm really trying hard to eat healthy. I don't eat sugar. I think, sugar is, as far as I'm concerned, is poison. So I'm not eating the sugar, but I'm trying to keep up my caloric intake.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I have to say, for someone, and I remember our discussion back in April of 2012, who was struggling at that time, as you said, having trouble. I was reading just again yesterday, you were talking about forgetting how to spell the names of your grandchildren and calling your pets the wrong name and reaching the wrong place on the wall for the lights, getting lost when you're moving around. And I remember also you talking about you'd be reading from the top of a page to the bottom of the page. By the time you get to the bottom of the page, you'd have to go back to the top of the page again. So for someone who was there 13 years ago, you sound great. And it's, you're really remembering the things that you're doing on this and all your sponsors. And it's actually quite amazing to see, which is just wonderful. Tell me, are you going, how many miles are you going up on average? What's a typical day for you?
Well, again, there are factors that affect it, like weather or rain or storms and that
Mhm.
kind of thing. But generally, my best my best distance is 22.7 miles in a day.
Great.
I would say I'm more averaging around 17 to 18 miles a day.
Yeah.
And if it's extremely hot or there's maybe a podcast or I'm still working with my clients on Zoom. So if I have a couple of clients, that's a
Mhm.
couple of hours out of the
Yeah.
day. But this is not a race. I'm doing
Yeah.
this as a goal and a destination. So
Yeah.
when I get there, I'll get there.
Yeah. Fantastic. And so give us a little insight. What do you think about while you're walking all these miles?
Well, I love that, and I was thinking about it as a preparation for our talk today.
Yeah.
What's really been remarkable is I think that the rhythm and the cadence of being out there on my own and walking and being in very good health is just caused me to feel so peaceful and so calm about my life. Memories have come back from my childhood, from relationships with my parents, and things that happened that I've forgotten years ago. It seems like I've just sharpened the saw, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I know I really just I want to say though to people that I don't think I could ever feel this healthy and this strong unless I had made all of these changes. And when people talk about the difference between going on one of the new drugs that would have a lot of terrible side effects and not really guarantee you a reversal, but rather a slowing down of the symptoms, and
Yeah.
yet the side effects of this protocol are all good. And I've said to you before, it's like the fountain of youth. Who else could be 81 years old, get up in the morning, no stiffness, no soreness. I'm ready to go. And I'm not special, but what I've done is I've fine-tuned my body through being having a healthy lifestyle. And I just invite everyone, if never mind if you want to save your brain, if you want to be youthful and save your
Yeah.
body, and have lots of energy, I think this is the way to go.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, fantastic. This is great. So let's this is something that's maybe should be on everyone's bucket list, like taking quite a hike and being able to think about your life this way, which is great. Let's go. There are some questions here. Now I see there was a question from Sally, which seems to have disappeared here. I'm not quite sure why that would be, but if you guys can stick the question from Sally back up. Sally, of course, another person who has reversed her decline beautifully. She's over 7 years now, doing very well. She is also part of the first survivors of Alzheimer's book, as are you and Julie G and Lucy and Deborah and Edward and a number of people. Frank is another one who is there. So uh, I think it would be certainly helpful, and she's done such a great job. But let me look at the ones that are listed here currently. So Vicky is saying, if you could only continue two of your protocols for healthy cognition at age 81, and she said, happy birthday. Are there two things that you could recommend? What would be the two that you would continue?
A great question. I would continue daily exercise and not only aerobic exercise, but strength training. We need both every day. I mean, really, everyday exercise and staying away from ultra processed food and eating real food as close to the natural way it comes as possible. Food and exercise are super important. The other things are important too, but I think those two really would bring you to a healthier body.
Yeah, thank you. And then Martin is asking about the interim results of the trial. So great questions. So there's an ongoing clinical trial, randomized controlled trial. So we are comparing the standard of care to the protocol that you've been talking about. And the results are striking. The trial will be over October 31st, but it's over 3/4 completed now. So of course we have a lot of results so far. And the results are already highly statistically significant. And what we're seeing is people on the protocol do exactly what you did. They're going up, up, up with their cognition. And the people who are doing the standard of care are going down, down, down with their cognition. So as you indicated earlier, simply slowing the decline, that doesn't say, it still says you're going to decline. You're just going to decline a little more slowly. We'd like to see people actually improve. So the results are striking. We're very excited about that. And as I mentioned, there is a difference if you get with someone who's well trained and who's doing the right thing and has good results. The outcomes are better in general than those who are not well trained and not doing this. No surprise. The other thing, as you know, people who start extremely late in the process, it's tougher and tougher and tougher. No different than what you would see with cancer. The earlier you start to try to get rid of it, the better chance you have for long-term health. And then Martin is going on to say, what about 3 of the 7 basic strategies that are not too complicated? We talk about the 7 basics, and those are, the plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet, exercise, optimizing your sleep, stress, brain training, detox, and some targeted supplements. So maybe you've talked a little bit about what made the most difference to you.
Well, in addition to totally changing my diet and exercising more, I also dealt with my stress level because I was working in a highly stressed field, and I had a lot of international travel and living in a lot of places that weren't. They were kind of conflict zones. A lot of stress about that. I really started to meditate again and took up yoga. In fact, I became a yoga teacher, and I think really finding that connection between the mind and the body and being able to let go of stress. I mean, we know stress raises our cortisol. When our cortisol's high, our brain isn't working well. I mean, we know this from years and years of science, but we forget about it sometimes. You cannot live in 911 all the time, which is what I was doing, and
Yeah.
expect your brain to work well. So that was one thing. I mean, the other thing for me was sleep. I was a bad sleeper. I used to brag, oh, I only need 4 or 5 hours of sleep. Well,
Yeah.
hello. My brain was begging for more oxygen, for more time to cleanse itself. And I had to work very hard on that because it was not easy for me to switch from being a poor sleeper to being a good sleeper.
Right.
And I use a lot of tools. There's so many good books out now, and people talk about it, the experts. And I think there are ways if we really pay attention to that. I had sleep apnea. I had to address that. You talk about it in your books.
Yeah.
And I think that we can't leave any of these things unaddressed
Right.
because they're all important. Some depends, we're all different. So some people have a harder time with one element than another. But what I've done over the 13 plus years has been like peeling the onion. Do the things, the basic, the food, the exercise, the sleep, and continue. I took up the photobiomodulation, the red light therapy, the saunas. I have the V-Light and also the helmet. My feeling about it is my brain is the most important organ in my body. If it doesn't work, I don't work.
Yeah.
So why would I not put all my effort into healing my brain? So
Yeah.
that's kind of the direction. So in addition to the basic 7 that you have in the protocol, I've also embraced some of the other aspects of it. So yeah, I think people, you just got to get on the bandwagon here and do what you can as often as you can.
Yeah, and I do think the wearables are helpful to so many people, especially because they can pick things up early. We tell people use a wearable, target 4 things in your sleep. You want to have at least 7 hours of total sleep. You want to have at least 90 minutes of REM. You want to have at least 60 minutes of deep sleep. You want to have an SpO2, an oxygen saturation of at least 94%. So if you hit those 4 parameters when you're sleeping, you're having a good sleep. But you can see when things start to fall apart. If you're not getting enough deep sleep, that's not so good for your detox. If you're not getting enough oxygenation, you do have to look into the possibility of having sleep apnea, and that's a very common contributor to cognitive decline. So another one here from Rachel. She says, "I'm told there's zero hope for COVID damages. Is that true?" No, absolutely not. And there are groups, multiple groups, working on what to do about COVID and long COVID. And Dr. Patrick Hanaway is part of a group that's looking at long COVID. And you have a couple of different things that get damaged. You have microthrombi. You can have some autoimmunity. You can have some ongoing inflammation, and you can have some residual virus as well. And so using the armamentarium to address these different things, different people, again, very much like cognitive decline, different people will need different things to get the best outcomes. But there's no question there are very good outcomes in many people with COVID. Yes, at the same time, of course, the inflammation created by COVID and the vascular compromise, these are potential contributors to cognitive decline. And we hear the story all the time. The person started their decline after COVID. When you hear it after COVID, you hear it after anesthesia, you hear it, after exposure to some toxins, after a new roof leak, after a new infection. All these things are things that can contribute. And then Christy's saying, can you share your ApoE status?
Yes, I don't mind sharing that. I am APOE 3 3. I'm not in the APOE 4 category, but it's interesting because my mother had Alzheimer's and 4 of her brothers all passed away from Alzheimer's. So I'm always puzzled by that because I thought if it's so strong in my maternal side, I really expected to at least have 1 copy, but my tests, I've done 2 different tests and I'm not showing up with it.
Yeah, and I should mention some of the most striking results we've seen with improvements are APO and ApoE4/4s. So it doesn't really matter if you have a single copy, 2 copies, or 0 copies. It does matter in terms of age. The age of onset tends to be a little bit younger, of course. It does matter in that you tend to have a little more of a pro-inflammatory component with the ApoE4s. The people who are ApoE4 negative tend to have more of a toxic component and sometimes a vascular component, is a general rule. But all 3 groups improve. And in fact, in our first trial, which we published, we saw statistically significant improvement in both the ApoE4 positives and the ApoE4 negatives. So please don't be concerned no matter what your ApoE status is. Another person's mentioning about seizures and ketogenic diets. And yes, ketogenic diets absolutely have an anti-seizure activity. That's what they were first used for. Now, in general, especially for childhood seizures, they tend to ramp up higher. We typically are in the 1 to 2 range, even up to 4. The people who are trying to prevent seizures or treat seizures are more in the 6 to 8 range. So they would want to bump a little higher, but you could go by your seizure control. And so if you're controlling well and you're only at 2, that sort of thing, then don't worry about it. So yes, that can be helpful. And then there's one here from Sarah. Is creatine beneficial? Yes, absolutely. And again, just what we talked about, energetics, which creatine supports. One of the things that is a critical contributor, and as Judy, as you mentioned, you have been taking creatine. A lot of people will recommend 5 grams per day. It does, as you mentioned, also help to build muscle. Muscle, in turn, helps you to be more insulin sensitive. So there are a lot of advantages, and certainly this is a good one to address. Lynette is asking, are you stopping and stretching often? The muscles can get quite sore with a workout. You are amazing. Yes, I second that. So, what are you doing about stretching?
Well, it's interesting, especially being a yoga practicer and a yoga teacher. In the beginning, I did spend more time doing the yoga poses and stretches. To be quite honest, I don't do a lot of stretching now. I do a little bit. Sometimes I do some wall push-ups against the vehicle, or I'll grab my ankle and pull them up a little bit just to get the knees working. But I will say that I'm not running a marathon. I am walking, and walking is the most natural thing that human beings can
Yeah,
do. We're designed to walk. And a shout out to Zero Shoes. I walk in
yeah,
flat shoes that
yeah,
allows my toes to be like fingers.
yeah.
The toes are spread. That gives me balance. It puts my shoulders over my hips and my hips over my knees. And I've learned how to really make sure that I walk correctly. So I start out slowly. I used to run marathons years ago, and I'd always do a few rounds when I was training around the track, and I would always start slowly and build up. But I don't really find I haven't gotten stiff or sore, not day one since I started.
Yeah.
So
One of the things that's impressed me the most is that you have had no joint problems. I would have thought you would have said, my hip has been bothering me lately. You've really done remarkably well with your joints, and that shows how little systemic inflammation you have.
I know, and I was very happy to know that. I've really been lucky though, because I don't have joint problems. But before I started the protocol, I had arthritis in my hands, my joints in my hands, and in my knees, to the point that I had to sidestep up and down my stairs in my house. And I started taking a lot of the supplements, particularly curcumin,
Yeah.
turmeric. And I honestly think that as the anti-inflammatories plus the other things that I do to cut down on inflammation, the arthritis pain went away. I still have, you can see the joints are swollen and disformed from years of having it.
Yeah.
It also runs in my family,
Mm.
but I have zero pain from arthritis now. It's one of the, I think I call it one of the added bonuses of the
Yeah.
protocol.
Good. And then Marie is asking, could you tell us some supplements that you take? You mentioned curcumin. Other things that you want to mention?
Well, I do take fish oil supplements. I take fish oil. I take D3 with K2. I don't take any calcium. I try to eat vegetables that have enough calcium in them, and I take a standard multivitamin that that I have enough vitamin C and other of the nutrients. I do take a B complex that makes sure that I have the methylation for B, because I'm one of those people genetically I don't methylate well, and so my homocysteine has always been a little on the high side, and I've really tried very hard to take the B complex and the folate and so forth to make sure that that stays down. I do take urolithin A, which really helps to build the mitochondria. And
Yeah.
I've long felt that the smallest unit of analysis, is our energy center in each of our cells, needs to be nourished.
Mhm.
And I find that I've been taking it now for a couple of years, and I find that, it's hard to tell when you're doing a lot of things that is that the reason I have so much energy? I don't know, but young people have told me that I run circles around them, much, much younger than I am. And I don't know what it's from, but I think I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing.
I think it's working. I remember when Julie G was doing this and taking it home to her husband, who's an airline pilot, and he started doing this, and the other pilots were saying, "Wait a minute, how did you get in such good shape? Why do you have more energy than we do?" So that is fantastic. Now, Maria Len is saying this is fantastic. I have sporadic fatal insomnia, and I have supported with doxycycline and Wall's protocol. Great. This is another one that has been so sporadic fatal insomnia. There's SFI and FFI. These are prion diseases instead of the A beta amyloid that we see in Alzheimer's disease, much, much more common. This is a prion protein, PRP, type of amyloid, which is much, much less common. But it's great that you are doing something, Maria Len. Please keep up the great work, and I hope that the Walls protocol is going to be helpful to you. Renee is saying, will you write a book after your trip?
Yes,
That is
I'm
a great
working
idea.
on that.
Yeah,
I thought I would have much more time on the road. I thought, oh, great, every evening I'm just going to get my computer out and write. But honestly, after 8, 9, 10 hours of walking, sometimes I want to get my meal in early enough so that I don't go to bed with a full stomach. Keep
yeah.
trying to keep to the 3 hours of window before eating. So I haven't been writing as much as I'd like to, but I've got only now I'm one third the way, so I figure I've got two thirds now. I can make sure that I do a little bit more time on that.
Yeah, great. I look forward to reading it. And that next one here is from Susan. She's asking about Down syndrome, and her son also has SIRS. So very important point. I'm glad you made this, Susan. So what happens when we look at the molecular biology of what's going on? There is, and you can see it at every level. You can see it at the molecular species level, at the mitochondrial level, at the cellular level, the tissue, the organ, and even the organism. You've got this connection mode and you've got protection mode. And so what we're seeing as disease is really it's your body trying to protect itself against these various insults, like insulin resistance and like infections and things like that. So we want to, when you take something that starts you genetically already predisposed to the protection side, and that's ApoE4, but it's also Down syndrome. In Down syndrome, it's because, of course, you have an extra copy of chromosome 21 that gives you an extra copy, among other things, of APP itself. So you have the ability to make more amyloid. And so the least little insult, boom, you're going to over respond, just as someone with ApoE44 does. So, okay, no problem. We simply have to work a little harder to get that back onto connection mode and away from the protection mode. As Judy was saying in her case, it's about methylation and it's about toxin exposures and things like that she wrote about in the first survivors of Alzheimer's. So I completely agree with you, Susan, and I think it would be important. Anyone who has Down syndrome should be on this sort of approach and should be continuing to optimize. And you mentioned COVID. Yes, it's just another thing that pushes you more toward the protective side. But the good news is we understand this much better than before, and we can address the various pieces that drive this and get you back into that connection mode. Catherine here is asking, what type of water filter do you recommend?
Well, at home, I think the osmosis, the type of filters that really takes a lot of things, a system in your house. I can't do that really. Well, I haven't explored that in my RV. So I'm using just like a Brita filter to filter already tap water, which presumably is fairly clean, but then filter it through the Brita, which takes out some more of the impurities. So that's the best I can do on the road, I think.
Yeah, great point. Okay, and then Maria is asking how many patients in the trial. So an important word about that. Uh, when you have something that has a minimal effect, you have to have 1,000 or 1,500 people just to see a difference. We calculated, as every trial does, we calculated before the trial started, how many people would it take to show a statistically significant difference? And the answer was between 50 and 60. The people in the trial, we have 72 people in the trial. There are 48 on the treatment and 24 on the standard of care. And then at the end of those, they do switch over. And we do see people who are going downhill. They switch over to the treatment side and they start going right up again. So they start improving. So there's no question the temporal relationship between treatment and improving is striking. And in fact, you and I talked about that way back when, because you contacted me after 3 months when you were clearly noticing a difference. But it doesn't happen typically after 2 or 3 days. It takes a few months for most people to start seeing that improvement. If we were to do a trial with 1,000 people, of course, we'd all love to see that. It would cost us $80 million to do a trial with 1,000 people with the protocol because there's so much data crunching, doctor time, all health coaching, all the different stuff that it takes, and then analysis. And the drug company trials will go anywhere from 50 to $100 million for a phase 3 trial with 1,000 or 1,500 patients. So these are expensive. We've been so grateful to Four Winds and Diana Merriam for their tremendous support. It's still costing $6.6 million for the trial that we are completing. So it's not inexpensive to do all these different pieces and follow everyone so closely, but it's very important to get those data. So the answer is 72 people. Sure, it would be great to have 1,000, but to show a significant difference, which is exactly what we're after, the bigger your effect, the fewer people it takes to show that. And I might mention, years ago, the world was in a similar situation. There was nothing at that time for childhood leukemia. And the initial trial was 16 people, of whom only 10 got improvements. And those 10, they were only temporary. But it was clearly better than anything that had gone before. So it ushered in the era of treatable childhood leukemia. And today, between 60 and 70% of people with childhood leukemia are cured. So that was the first step in the right direction. Yes, you got to start somewhere. We got to build on it. I'd like to see, bigger and bigger trials. But I think at this point, we've seen it again and again and again. And so we need to just continue on, and we need to keep on looking at how we can make it better and better and better. And then let's see, James is asking first signs to look for to start early. Yeah, great point. So well, maybe Judy, tell us, what were the first things that you noticed way back? You told me when you saw me in 2012, you thought it was probably about 2 years or so that you'd been noticing something. And what were the first things you noticed?
Well, part of it was I've always been an avid reader since childhood, and I've had a pretty good mind to comprehend technical things. And part of my job working overseas a lot was to assess technical situations and write reports on it. And I found more and more that I was unable to really do that efficiently. And then I found with reading, as I said earlier, I would read a little bit and get down to the end of the page and have to go back and start over because I had forgotten
Yeah,
what I had read. And that was one of the early signs. And the other was direction, like losing my sense of direction, which
yeah,
I had always had a very good sense of direction. And going even in familiar places, like driving over to my son's house at the time where they lived, I one evening I got lost and I was driving around for hours and I was really ashamed to admit to anybody.
yeah,
I mean that I got lost in that place. So it was really frightening. And then as that progressed, not recognizing people, like my neighbor from across the street would come over and say hello, and I'd be trying to listen to what she was saying, but I'd be thinking, now, what's her name? What's her name? And somebody I'd known for 15 years.
yeah.
So I think that those symptoms for me were not, it didn't happen and permanently happen. They would come and go. And I think that's where we go into the demons of denial, because we'll say, well, maybe I was tired or maybe, something else happened. But when you get several of those symptoms happening, you really need to go and get tested and figure out really where you are with it. And I think that you might want to mention a little bit about testing, because I think that is so important to really understand. So you can, as they say, you can't manage what you don't know. You've got to find out.
Yeah, and that fits together beautifully because if you go back to this whole issue of, so what are the early symptoms? In general, what you see is two different things. For two-thirds of people or so, it'll be a memory issue. So they'll have trouble remembering names or remembering numbers. Just you mentioned before about the numbers that you were trying to remember at the time. It'll be people going to dinner with their spouse and asking the same question 3 times at dinner, that sort of thing. But for the other one-third, it's not what we call non-amnestic, so non-memory related things. They'll have trouble figuring a tip with some calculations, or they'll have trouble organizing things. A common one I hear is someone lost their job because they just can't organize things the way they used to. Recognizing faces, visual analysis, driving, and geography, and spatial recognition. All these things are also they're in that one-third. And in general, when we see those non-amnestic presentations, we think that we should be focused more on toxicity and tick-borne illnesses. They tend to be more common with those. The more copies of ApoE4 you have, on the other hand, the more you tend to have some, at least some degree of memory loss as part of the presentation. Now, you mentioned testing. This fits in beautifully because the earlier we can get in, the easier it is, the more complete it is that you can improve people. And so the thing is that if you now are looking at things like the biomarkers, p-tau, it used to be you had to have a PET scan or a spinal tap. Now you don't have to have that. You can just get your blood drawn, get a p-tau. So we have the so-called get a brain scan. If you just look at get a brain scan, you can look at this and you can get the most sensitive p-tau, GFAP, and NFL. In fact, a few days ago, I was going over the results with someone whose p-tau had come in a little bit high. They went to a different group to do a p-tau just to see how it compared. The other group said, well, we can't pick up anything. And he said, well, how come Neurocode picked this up? And they said, because theirs is more sensitive than ours is. So yes, it's more sensitive. And they have an even better one coming out in the next several months. It's called Super p-tau 217. I recommend it for everyone. I already got my p-tau 217, NFL, and GFAP a couple of months ago. I will repeat it. Mine was happily, I was normal. I'll repeat it in 2 years. For anyone less than 60, just do it every 5 years. For anyone who's 60 or over, you want to do it every couple of years just to make sure, because if you now start seeing it become abnormal, good, you want to jump in, even if you're asymptomatic at that time, to make sure that you don't have problems. So no question, we're understanding, we can see this disease earlier and earlier. And by the way, there were a couple recent papers showing changes in the 20s, even though people weren't getting diagnosed until the 60s, 70s, 80s, although we see a lot now diagnosed in the 50s and even late 40s. But they're seeing the beginning biochemical changes in the 20s. So good for us all to know. We recommend when you hit 35, do your first brain scan, check and see where you stand, and then just do it every 5 years. It's easy. It's a simple blood draw, and you can get in early. There's another one here. What about animal-rich keto diets relative to plant-rich? So great point. And we've had people ask, what about purely carnivorous diets? So far, there's been nothing published. There's not say it's not helpful. And I think where that's been helpful is in some people with autoimmunity do well. But in general, a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet, which doesn't stop you at all from having wild-caught fish and having grass-fed beef and having pastured chicken and pastured eggs. Those are all great. But you want to have the phytonutrients, you want to have the fiber, you want to have the polyphenols, you want to have all these things. So when you look at what's been evaluated for cognition, what's worked best is a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. So that's why we're only about what's best outcomes. That's the thing that has worked best. Robin is saying, and shout out to Robin, who's an absolutely outstanding brain health coach in North Carolina. Can you share what's helped you to stay compliant all these years? This is such a huge issue for so many of your clients, of course. So Judy, how do you stay compliant?
I just keep my eye on the goal, and that is a healthy brain. And I know that if I don't do what I need to do, in other words, following my protocol, I really fear that it will lapse. And I can't afford to do that. And I don't know, maybe I'm a little different, but I don't use the terminology that I'm been cured. I say I've reversed
Hmm,
cognitive decline
right,
because I still genetically I'm the same person.
right.
And if I took up the old tendencies of poor sleep, poor eating, lack of exercise, I think I could easily go back. And it's the motivation to really have to optimize at all times, to really make sure that on a day-to-day basis, every day, I'm doing a little better in every way that I can. And that kind of goes with everything in your life. And this is not something that is that difficult if you really get on board with it. I find it's my way of life now. I don't find it particularly difficult. But I feel like if I were to go backwards and start eating donuts or whatever, I'd be in deep trouble. And at 81, I'm looking forward to hitting my 101, and maybe on after that, maybe I'll walk across the UK or New Zealand or who
That's
knows.
yeah.
So I'm not willing to take a chance. So why should anybody take a chance?
Yeah. Yeah, I think just for people to understand, if we could get that one point across, this is not hopeless. And, Julie G coined the term false hopelessness that is given to us by standard of care. And I think that's such a good point. A couple of last ones. I know we're running out of time here. Miley is saying, what was Judy's background that she chose to become a coach and was successful, although late in her life? What was your background that told you I'm gonna do some health coaching?
Well, I'm trained as an anthropologist, and most of my training was in medical anthropology, looking at epidemiology,
Yep.
epidemial situations worldwide, looking
Yep.
at HIV/AIDS in Africa and
Mm.
other diseases. And I just have I had a health bent to my interest, and I am
Yeah.
trained as a researcher. So when I started to ask myself, what can I do to become credentialed and to have the right training? It was natural for me to go with the training for being board certified and going from there. And I really do enjoy helping people, giving the guidance that I've gotten from you and just in terms of the way I live my life. I think it's really something that gives me a lot of pleasure and in helping other people.
Yeah, thanks. Next one here is from Dr. Stephen, who mentions he's used this approach to reverse most of his damage from Iraq War. Fantastic. And it is important, when you look at these, we can adapt this sort of thing. All of these degenerative conditions are fundamentally network insufficiencies. You have a different network that is motor modulation. That's the one that goes awry in Parkinson's. You have a different network that is for power amplification. That's the one that goes awry in ALS. And you can go on and on. There's another one for macular degeneration. So we can adapt this, but there are some basics that can be done. So really a good idea and great to hear, Stephen, that you're doing this. He mentions see you in September. September is going to be the Integrative Medicine for Mental Health, IMMH, which will be in San Diego. And actually it will be at the Town and Country, which is where you and I and the whole gang stopped on your day one of your walk
That's
to
right.
have some lunch. So it's going to be at that site in San Diego. I look forward to anyone who's interested in coming to that. Cat Toops will be talking. I'll be speaking there. Dr. Heather Sanderson will have a whole discussion on reversal of cognitive decline. And then Lucy, so shout out to Lucy. Lucy has been another. Her story is also in the first survivors of Alzheimer's. She's done a fantastic job. Has had issues with Ehrlichia, with Lyme disease, with all these sorts of things, and has done so beautifully and has really stuck with it, and is herself an excellent psychiatrist. So great to hear from Lucy as always. She's saying, could you please tell us about your experiences combating mold? And then she said, congratulations, you inspire me every day. That's great. So, Judy,
Well, yeah, I mold was a big part of my story. As I said, I'd worked overseas and lived overseas in very moldy places. You could actually see the mold growing on the wall. And before I became educated about the topic, I never thought much of it. But I did know that I got throat closed, eyes got red. I mean, I
mm,
had all kinds of headaches and bad symptoms. And I was getting that toxicity in my body. So I also lived in a house that had a leaky basement. So when I finally got tested and found that my levels were really high for mycotoxins, I literally had to move out of the house and remediate
mm,
a couple of times. Finally, I just switched houses because it was really worth it to me to get into a clean environment. And, we have mold everywhere, and not everyone is as sensitive
right.
maybe as I am, but there's a percentage of the world population that's missing the alleles that help us to get rid of the toxicity. And unfortunately, I'm one of those people. And I'm like a hawk about any extra water in my RV as I'm traveling. I know that I don't have any mold there, and I don't want anything wet or damp that might cause that. So it really made a huge difference for me to get detox. And the good news about once you know that you have a problem with mold there are programs for detoxing,
Yeah.
and sometimes it takes a long time, but it's not difficult and it's not impossible. And I would say that it's really good to check yourself, to get a test to find out if you do have mold in your body and get rid of it.
Yeah, and I was just at Dr. Richie Shoemaker's meeting 2 weeks ago, and of course he's the one that brought this to the attention of the world and showed that there is such thing as he named it, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, typically triggered by mycotoxins and related inflammagens. And he's really made a difference for so many people, and it is a common contributor to cognitive decline. We see it all the time. So I see we've run out of time here. It's after 2 already. So we'll take the rest of these online. But again, I just want to congratulate you, Judy, walking 1,000 miles. You've got a huge chunk already down. You're now more than a third of the way to your destination. And we look forward to you arriving in Florida in the future. And please be safe. Stay as far away as you can from the cars, please. Stay hydrated. Keep your electrolytes good. Keep your diet good. And just enjoy. What an amazing, amazing journey you are having. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.